Anyway, every morning, most days anyway, in the community here at Bonvo, we have a session with the Rule of St. Benedict. And it's divided into daily readings, of course, so we choose the reading for today, and today it was on restraint of speech. And it's always very illuminating to listen to the reflection of each of the members of the community, and some of them are very new, of course, to the life and to Benedict, but they're living the life and reading the Rule, and it's very interesting to see how the Rule speaks to them, and also how they can illuminate it for those of us who've been reading the Rule and think we know it for many years. And as Benedict says, God often reveals what is best to the young, which was is the theme of this year's Monte Oliveto retreat, which we're not having in Monte Oliveto this year. The theme is the wisdom of the young, and we're going to have it online from Bonvo. So we're called in July, I think, end of June, July. So we're calling it Monte Oliveto at Bonvo. And I've been thinking quite a lot recently, particularly because of the inspiration and the insight that comes through the young people who pass through here at Bonvo, who've been with us over the last few months of our shutdown. So, so actually the shutdown is more or less lifting in France now. We're hearing some, if you go up to the entrance to the property, you'll see a car driving by occasionally, which we haven't seen for a long time. But I still haven't been really basically off the property for 3 months. And I must say, I have no great desire to do it. So those of you who think that I have been missing my jet set life, I'm afraid you don't know me very well. Anyway, it's from this very beautiful and peaceful place, and a place of growth, that I speak to you and send you love. In the Rule today, as I said, we were talking about silence, and there are 2 words for silence in Latin. The first is taciturnitas, which is the name of chapter 6, the title of chapter 6, which is translated as restraint of speech, or taciturnity. Well, what is, words are important, and translation is important, interpretation is important. The Rule is not a rule book. It's not like you break the speed limit, you're 5 miles over the speed limit, you'll be punished. It's not that kind of rule. And in the same way, the gospel is not an ideology. It's not a morality with strict moral rules. There's only one morality in the gospel, which is the morality of love. So what does that mean? St. Augustine said, love and do what you like. Ama et fac quod vis. So it throws the responsibility back on us. The Christian life, as we know, say from the letter of the Galatians, of Jesus's attitudes towards the law and regulations and religion and rules. Christianity, the gospel, is about freedom and maturity. And St. Paul gets very annoyed with the Galatians, who found that responsibility and maturity, spiritual maturity, was too much for them. And they wanted to regress back into the slavery and codependency of being just a good, whatever it was, a good Jew, a good Christian, a good Muslim, a good Hindu, whatever it might be. And the spirit of the gospel is entirely different from that. Of course, we've tamed it, we've reduced it, we've domesticated it. We've done, institutionally, we've done everything we can to keep the words, but hide the meaning. To hide the meaning of this call to freedom and to full expansion of spirit. This is exactly that quality that we find in the teaching of Father John. Listen to what he says in the Moment of Christ. He says, we can always find new ways to describe what meditation is really about. But remember, always, keep clear in your minds how you meditate. You take your word, your mantra, you recite it from the beginning to the end of the meditation, and so on. And he says, you must never lose contact with that fundamental simplicity. There is always a danger that in thinking or talking about meditation that we lose contact with its essential simplicity, which is the essential simplicity of simply saying the mantra. Well, I'm sorry it's so simple. If we could complicate it, if we could sort of put some spin on this or make it more looser, we'd have a bigger audience. But what would be the point of that? What we've been given, and I'm not saying it makes us better people, but what we've been given is this gift of essential simplicity, of seeing that all the complex ideas, all the different methods, all the moralities, everything else points towards this essential simplicity of the gospel. And in this way of meditation, we try to adjust ourselves to that essential simplicity, to become more simple ourselves. Not easy, but that's what we've got to. We're grateful for it, but it's what we've got to share as well. I want to describe to you, he goes on to say, what is this purification of our whole being that takes place as we say the mantra? I want to suggest that meditation is simply a way of coming to your own center and remaining in your center, awake, alive, and still. Well, what could be more simple than that? And you might read that and just skip over it and say, okay, what's the next interesting idea? But I think what I've come to learn over the last few decades is that instead of skipping over that kind of sentence, we should go back to it and repeat it and listen to it and remember that essential simplicity. That's the only way to depth, to clarity, to the heart of the gospel. And I was saying, in everything to do with the rule of Saint Benedict, or with meditation itself, or with the gospel, it's all about interpretation. You cannot reduce any aspect of an authentic spiritual teaching to rules and regulations or fixed definitions. You just can't do that without betraying it or actually corrupting it. You can't do it. And that's what the Galatians tried to do. That's what institutional religion is always tempted to do. Just go for a false simplicity. You know, St. Benedict says, don't give a false peace. Well, we know what a false peace is. It's when you should be honest with somebody about a conflict you have, but you put it off, you postpone it, you brush it under the carpet, and you sort of move on and say, smile and say everything's okay, but it isn't. That's a false peace. And so this discontent, this anger or this hurt just festers away in your unconscious until one day you have to face it again. That's a false peace, but there's also a false simplicity, which is when we actually avoid the truth. That simplicity is not easy. But to be simple is this process of purification. And what is purification? It means getting what is impure, false, or shouldn't be there, getting that out, straining it, washing it, like when you're cooking, purifying the ingredients, and making sure that you've got to the essential. You don't have any bugs or slugs or impurities in the food or in the vegetables. So this process of purification is not easy, but it is the way in which we can encounter the reality, the truth of the teaching. What we saw in the gospel yesterday at Mass, and in all the words of Jesus really, especially in John's gospel, is that whatever else you may say about the Christian life, whatever theology you may have, whatever it may teach us about repentance and conversion and humility, at the end of the day, it is our relationship to Jesus that matters. In the gospel, in the Christian vision, it's not the ideology or the morality that really matters. It is what he shows us about himself, who he is. It doesn't even matter so much what we say he is. You remember the time when he asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" And then he said to them, "But who do you say I am?" And Peter answered, but Jesus didn't comment on the answer. He didn't start a discussion about who he was. He is who he is, and he communicates himself to us as the person he is. And that means we have continually in the journey of our Christian discipleship to let go of our ideas of who he is. Because we very easily begin to project, to define, to put labels, to think we know who he is. But in fact, if we do that, we lose the immediate, intimate self-communication of his real presence, the real presence to us in our hearts and in the scriptures and in nature and in the Mass and so on. He communicates himself to us personally, directly, not through words, primarily, not through rituals, primarily, not through ideas, ideologies, or rules or regulations or institutions. Of course, all of these may be vehicles for that self-communication. But in meditation, we accept that we know him through presence, and our capacity to receive that presence, to be present to him, is being purified. our capacity to know him, love him, serve him, be one with him, that is constantly being purified. And there come times where you get complacent. You think, okay, I've done a lot of, been through a lot, suffered a lot, wrestled with my doubts. And now I'm pretty sure I have got Jesus under my belt. I can live with him, he's very nice, and then you realize you haven't, because there's a long way to go. And that's the path of discipleship. Just to follow, not to lead Jesus, but to let Jesus lead us. Not to carry Jesus around with us as if he were a sort of a pet on a leash. You know how Christians sometimes act as if they've got Jesus on a leash and he's like a little dog running behind them. And they say, oh, here's Jesus. You should accept Jesus and you'll be saved. It's not like that, is it? He's always calling us to surrender that ego instinct to possess or control or to fantasize, and to reduce, to purify our capacity to receive his self-giving, his self-offering, his being with us. That's the beauty and the necessity of meditation, really, for the Christian life. And perhaps this time of this pandemic, and the aftermath, which God knows is going to be hard for us all, especially for those most vulnerable, maybe this is, let's hope, at least a partial beginning of a new way for the church. I'm not talking about the whole of society, but for the church to understand its mission and to understand its own nature. One of the ways we betray the simplicity of the gospel is to put the church institutionally on a pedestal and worship the church rather than Christ. That's one of our very constant mistakes throughout history. And yet, the church as the body of Christ, which needs some kind of organization and institution, is the means, flawed and human, of passing on the real simplicity of the gospel and the revolutionary experience of recognizing the risen Christ. Now, just to come back to, and then to end, I was saying that this morning we were talking about silence. And silence purifies. Silence is an essential part of this purification of our being. The two words for silence, taciturnitas, which was the title of chapter 6, where he speaks about not gossiping, not just getting caught up in empty, shallow talk, and not just making jokes, just for the sake of making noise. He's not saying don't laugh, he's saying be true. Don't complicate your relationships with other people. Be authentic. Be free, be spontaneous, be childlike, but be authentic. We're not authentic when we're gossiping. We're not authentic when we're just trying to create laughter in order to cover up something else. So taciturnity then is the external aspect of silence that we practice. For example, when we sit down to meditate, we turn off our phone. That's taciturnitas, turning off your phone and really turning it off. And in community, you know, of course, like online here, practicing a certain discipline of external restraint of speech. That's taciturnitas, and it's a necessary discipline of the spiritual journey. But then the other word is silentium. And silentium, silence, is not just an external thing. For example, just before we started meditating, somebody here was cutting the grass right under my window here with a strimmer. I hate those strimmers anyway, he was cutting. And so I had to lean out of the window and say, could you go do it somewhere else for the next half hour? Which he did. That's taciturnitas. That's respecting the discipline of silence. It's quiet at certain times. But silence is the quality of communion, of being, whether or not you're speaking. You can speak in silence. Now, if you speak too much, St. Benedict says, you will not avoid sin. So if you speak too much, you will lose the silence that you may have had at the beginning. So I'm going to stop now. But silence cannot be identified just with an external or measurable decibel limit. Silence is that quality of being fully attentive, fully connected, peacefully, joyfully, easily at one with. That's why Jesus, the risen Jesus, is silent in the world. And the world doesn't hear him because he's not speaking. But as soon as we begin to practice the work of silence in meditation, we begin to tune in to that quality of his silent presence. And it's in that experience that we are able to interpret, to translate, to understand the meaning of his teaching, and also the gift, the many gifts that come to us through fellowship, friendship, community with others who are doing the same work. Let's just end with that, the second part of this quotation from Moment of Christ, simplicity of oneness. Simplicity is oneness. The great problems with the lives of so many of us is that we live at an incredibly shallow level. By meditating, we seek our way to the depths of our own being. By meditating, we leave the shallow levels of our life behind and enter into something that is profound. By meditating, we leave behind the passing, ephemeral things of life and enter into what is eternal. This pilgrimage is the first responsibility of our lives. It is the first responsibility of every life that wants to be fully human, to return to our own center and to live out of the depths of our own profound capacity for life.